Welcome, everybody. I can see you all out there. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a great lineup here. I'm Mark Castell, founder of AEI Speakers Bureau and creator of the Education Avengers initiative. COVID-19 still has its icy grip on the education universe, and a new team of Avengers has been dispatched to save us all. Allow me to introduce our first champion of virtual learning, who will discuss achievement with strategies in hybrid learning, Kim Geddie.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking your valuable time to join us today. I'm so excited to talk to you about achievement in hybrid learning with various strategies. It's a very passionate subject of mine. I have a proud mother of two that 20-year-old twins that are in college now. I've been in education since '88 as a teacher, as an administrator, and currently am full-time consultant and working with teachers and students in multiple places at multiple times. I have seen so many things happen since the COVID-19, and I will tell you that it's a chance that we have to take something that could have been very much a negative, and there have been a lot of negative strategy, negative strategies as well, negative situations and such with what's happened. But I think that our goal at this point could be to really take those things that were negative and kind of put them to the back and look at how we can make it positive so that we can try to get some learning strategic approaches, achievement, and the things that we can take and learn from it and carry forward, so that when we're through with the pandemic, that we can look back and say, now look at the things that we're doing as educators that have made big differences, and we're sticking with it. We're carrying some of these things over. And so that's really the goal, is to kind of say, how do we survive this now while we're going through the last part of it? And then what do we do going forward? So I have a passion for it because I see the need. I see so many amazing educators that have come through and done incredible things. They have absolutely had every challenge in the world and risen to the top with all of these issues. So when we look at what we really want to do now is say there are gaps. We did our best and did a great job, but there are some gaps that we need to work on to move it to growth. And so with the acronym GROWTH, we're looking at the first one being goal planning and reflective questioning. I am so passionate about this. I actually co-authored a book called RQ4U, Reflective Questioning for Growth Mindset. And in this book, the whole idea of taking goals and working towards those goals to get kids to own their actions and to do something about it, stop the victim mentality. A lot of the issues we're dealing with now, we had before the pandemic. They're showing up in a different way. So with this system, you've got 4 steps that kids need to, first of all, face it. So join me, if you will, and say, you face it. So the first step is to face the situation, identify it, what really happened. And second, kind of own it. You own it. It's not going to be somebody else's fault, parents' fault, another friend's fault, a teacher's fault. I need to own the situation as it is. And then set goals to address personal responsibility for it, so I can change it, make it better, and make that mistake actually be something that can work for me if I learn from it and move forward. And then the third step is to fix it. So you can't just talk about it, realize, hey, I need to set a goal. I need to do it. I need to plan something. I need to execute it. The problem with this can be we have a lot of hesitancy with taking initiation and follow-up. So what are some strategies for that? That's something I can help you with if I get to see you again in a virtual world or one day in person. AEI, all of these wonderful Avengers, we can come to you. AEI will set that up, and all of these ideas can be taken to a much more extensive level. So getting kids to fix it and that plan to put in place, and then initiating and following it up. And the last one is to make a big check. You check it. So getting them to self-assess and celebrate it. Start again. What's next? So you'll see a target goal on the right-hand side of the screen. That is one example of one of the goals that setting forms that can be used. There are plenty of others, but this is just one example. When the thing I want to point out on that one is the evidence. What's it going to look like when I reach my goal? What are my steps to get there? Practicality, it can be utilized with all of these goals, can be utilized with whole class if you had one thing to work on to teach the process, or individual, taking the 2 to 3 to 4 minutes to talk about something that you might have at the beginning, end of class, advisory, class meetings, a lot of ways to make that happen. But this is a book, you can get it on Amazon, and it really does have a lot of great ways to deal with 4 different categories: for the procrastinator, the distracted, I've got to do social, whatever comes my way, the kid that doesn't plan ahead. Those are all situations, they don't take care of themselves, not getting enough sleep, not eating right. So those are all things that we have seen as prevalent issues with kids, and they're addressed in this. So I've now moved to the other thoughts, which would be respect. And this is a very huge issue today. And it's really teaching these kids to respect so many different areas. I could talk for an hour on this, and I don't have the time. That's a whole topic by itself. How do we communicate in a way that is received well with other people, and that I know how you hear, and learn that, right? So how can you maybe be a problem preventer as well as solver when you're working with a partner or in a group? And how do other people communicate? Cultural differences, economic differences, how to respect those differences and then maintain what's significant to you. That's huge. A lot of things need to happen for that to come to life. One of the biggest things that can help change an issue, if we got a kid or an adult as leaders in schools, a lot of these things, the teachers need to hear about them and be trained on them to be able to take them to the students. And this is huge because we always talk about changing behavior, but we're not going to change behavior unless we begin by changing the thinking. So this is a think tool that can help someone say, what was the trigger that then I responded with a harmful response, a hurtful response, a lack of respect in my response? What would the improved response be? Should it have been? Was it? Could it have been? And then the last 2, this is where we really can make change, because if I have negative thoughts that come into my head and I respond with reactions that are not like I want them to be, they're harmful or they're hurtful, or maybe it's inside, like I'm internal processing that, and it's not even that I'm harming someone else, but I'm not respecting myself, and I have harmful negative thoughts when something triggers me. This kind of a thought process by this tool can help whomever is dealing with these issues by thinking of what was my negative thought, and then I need to face the fact that it was a thought. You don't tell yourself a lie. The reality is I'm thinking, this is really hard. And then if you follow that, this is really hard, and I can't do it because I'm not very smart. That's the negative that can be harmful to self. Instead, this is really hard, but I'm going to try one of the new strategies that I was presented and try to see if I can make some progress and make another step towards my goal like I did last time, so that you're not creating cognitive dissonance by not facing the truth, but then you move forward. And then the last part of this is keywords, images, thoughts, actions to help make this come to life. So that is what we're talking about with, looking at respect for self, respect for others. The next in our acronym is opportunities. So when we look at the think form, it can work for that as well. And again, you've got other things to deal with, like encoding. This is a big one. And so I'm going to ask you to just look at the screen and take about 10 seconds to see all the words that are on the screen in the blue box. And then I want to ask you how many you can remember. And if you have a pen or pencil, write them down. If not, kind of keep track and count as to how many you think you can remember. All right, now look and see how many that you could remember in that short experience. And this is just a random list. It is not really encoded in any way like you see now on the screen. I'm going to ask you to look at this grouping, the 4 groupings, and I want you to notice that you've got different colors, different groups of words that have some reason to be together. I would point that out to students because some might not notice the way that it's grouped with meaning or with a color code or some kind of a cue, and then they might miss part of the magic of encoding, which is basically trying to help the short-term, long-term, and working memory work together. So it's really looking at as how am I going to store this? How am I going to retrieve this? And that's really key when we're looking at strategies that will help kids with effectiveness, whether it's online, whether it's at home, whether it's both. So look at this, and I'm going to ask you to See how many you can remember and write those down in about 10 seconds. All right, write down what you can remember. And I can guarantee if you follow this and did what we just said, you will have more on this second round. So when we talk about encoding, we're talking about grouping things in a way that kids can remember them and retrieve them. And I have an MVAK up there in green on the screen, and that is to represent meaning. We need to help them find ways to have meaning with what they're learning, and then utilize visual, auditory, and kinesthetic ways with the grouping of the words, how they look at it. Do they draw a symbol to remember it? How are they going to process it? And how are we going to help them access it? Then we go to the W's, and this is where we're talking about feedback. So we want to have kids, when we plan a lesson and when we think about what we're going to do for a kid to learn whatever it is we're trying to teach them, and this is adults as well. Feedback is a huge factor in not having as much to have to remediate and having success. They're encouraged, and when they know what they need to fix, and fix it as soon as they can from when the lesson occurs. So when I'm planning a lesson as a teacher, you want to sit there, you want to think, who am I talking to when I teach this lesson? What do they already know? Where are they as we're going through the lesson? Where were they when we started? Where are we headed? Where did we arrive? You know, what do we need to do next? So think of your W's when you're planning a lesson, and as you check for feedback, as you go through the lesson and plan your transition into your next lesson. Then we talk about tech tool. Now I put tech tool here because when we talk about strategies, I want you to look on the screen and see, we could do strategies for a week. Any of these things we could do for multiple days, because there's just so much that we can do with students in the realm of strategies that work. And the thing with tech tool that I want to point out, the biggest idea to think of is, if the strategy is effective for learning, then that's a great one to use with technology. You don't want to find yourself caught up with having to feel like I have to use this and that and this and that type of platforms or software. Whatever the district or the school is working to use, being in continuity with that is what we want to do. But outside of the organization within the school or the class or the team department, it is a matter of using that technology with effective teaching strategies. And I find a lot of teachers that get more stressed about which piece of technology to use, when you don't have to use every piece to every extent that that piece can operate. What you want to do is use effective learning techniques and let the technology serve as your tool, and communicate effectively with technology like you do when you're not using technology. So a lot of things here when we talk about technology and hybrid models that we want to think about with critical thinking. You know, are we finding ways through online teaching to get kids to ask questions, to answer questions, to work in breakout rooms if that is what works, or to go for 5 or 10 minutes and work on something and come back, but providing a very dedicated avenue for questions to be asked, to be answered, especially in asynchronous settings. This is critical. So we're talking about tech tool. It's the idea of providing the support for the students at home. And at this point, I'm going to make a point that hits all of the letters in with growth, and that is flexibility. We needed to be flexible before. We need to be flexible with our flexibility now. When you're dealing with online, synchronous and asynchronous, we've got issues with technology at home. A lot of schools have done a lot of things to help with that, but that problem is not entirely alleviated. And so having some flexibility with when things are due, how they can accomplish that, being able to redo something. Redos are essential. If you've got a student that wants to redo some work to do a better job with it, it shouldn't just be when they're failing. That's what a lot of systems will say. If you're failing, you can redo it. Okay, well, if a kid's made a grade that's not all the way to where they've learned everything and they want to redo it, that's a great thing. We want to celebrate that. So flexibility with students working, thinking of the outcome in the end with where we want to be, and that is that they master this material. So I love the idea of kids being excited about improving their work and being accountable for the process of getting that work accomplished. So that brings us to habits. So when we talk about habits, this again is a very, very deep subject that could be addressed for a long time period, because look how extensive it is. The health Are we working with kids and with parents and with teachers on knowing how much sleep that they need, what a good night's sleep is, which includes as one factor not having technology or lights on when you sleep? Are we working with teachers, parents, and students on effective asynchronous and synchronous habits? Because we're thinking about our small and our big habits, right? So, what are those habits? When you're coming to a synchronous meeting, have you already gone to the restroom? Did you get there 5 minutes early? Do you have your snack ready? I've heard and have seen many times a meeting starts and kids want to go to the restroom or go get a snack. So it's the patterns, it's the habits for synchronous, and it's the habits for asynchronous success. Those things need to be explored. Balance is huge. How do you balance all of these things? What will you priority manage as significance and very significant and take this in depth? And it's a low level of priority, but I still need to do it, or abandon it. And then we look at independence. Do we have kids to the point that they're submitting their work on time? And if not on time, do we reflect as to why and what they could do to be able to submit it on time? And can they independently follow up with that work? Are they resourceful? It goes on and on, but the independence is huge. And that's one of the things that I have seen some improvement with a lot of students when, with the hybrid models, they have been taught properly how to work at home. So for those that are succeeding, they have a decent balance, I would imagine, the ones I've seen have, and they also have great habits for asynchronous and synchronous working. Whether they're with someone or not with someone, they've got a quiet place. They've got earphones if the home is loud, etc. So we look at independence, we look at thoughts and how to really control our thoughts, because if we want to change our habits, it starts with our thoughts. And then social. Social stands for communication, verbal, nonverbal, and social media, and looking at control of social media and all of the social media temptations they will have when they are working at home online. So many things need to be approached strategically for students to be able to succeed like we want them to in a hybrid model. And so with that, I'm going to bring this to a close, because today's objective was to give you a few immediate takeaways and largely to look at the components to bring to life in your setting, whether you're an administrator or teacher, to really help bring the effectiveness and the achievement strategically in hybrid models. So thank you very much for letting me be your Educator Avenger. And my contact information is on the screen. RQ for you if you're looking for help with goal setting is available on Amazon, and AEI has access to bring all of us to your school if that's something you'd like to pursue. With that, thank you for your time again. Mark, back to you.
Thanks, Kim. Very insightful presentation. Much appreciated. Our next Avenger is a highly regarded urban educator and an award-winning author who asks, is my school a better school because I lead it? Please welcome Baruti Kafele.
Thank you, Mark. Good to be here, everybody. And for this brief moment that I'll be with you, I want to talk about my professional life's purpose, which is principal leadership. It's leadership, but specifically principal leadership, with the question, is my school a better school because I lead it? But let me go back to the genesis of that question. As a rookie principal, I did 14 years of principal leadership. As a rookie principal, I used to sit in my office after school and just kind of reflect upon the day. And I asked myself the question, do I matter? Do I matter? And given the time we have here, and I know that there are various capacities beyond principal leadership, we're going to make this relevant to whomever's on the call or who will see the video later on. So I'm asking you, do you matter? I ask myself that question every day, and there were days when I really questioned myself relative to my answer, do I matter? But then as time went on, I looked at the question differently, and I asked myself, every day after school, does my leadership matter? Is there something about the skill set that I bring? Is there something about the leadership that I bring to a school, to staff, to students, to parents, to the community, the broader community? Does my leadership matter relative to our goals and objectives? But then as time elapsed, I kind of brought the two together, and I asked a question, and I say to folks every day, I say, if I could come up with a more potent question to ask leaders, I'd write a book about it as I did this question. And the question is my school a better school because I lead it? But typically, I ask the question like this. I say, is my school a better school because I lead it? See, in other words, I'm asking you, if you're a teacher watching right now, is that classroom a better classroom because you teach in it? Asked differently, are your students at an advantage because you are their teacher? I like to be self-reflective in everything I do. I want to look within myself. I want my audiences, I want my staff to look within self relative to self-reflection and self-assessment. So at the end of the school day, I say to principals all over America and all over the world, I say there's only one place on the planet for you to be, just one. And that's outside on the outside grounds with your students as they're being dismissed. I don't care if you're at the high school level. Two things. Number one, it gives you visibility, but number two, it gives you accessibility. It also allows you to be accessible to them, and it allows them to be accessible to you, right? So there's a lot of students I wanted to talk to after school, and it gave me that opportunity if I didn't get to them during the school day. But once the ground's cleared, and the only person left standing is me, everybody's gone, and I'm literally staring at the front of the building for 14 years. And I asked myself the same question for 180 days. Principal Kafele, is that school a better school because you lead it? Self-reflectively, is my school a better school because I lead it? So in other words, here's what I'm asking myself. Does equity abound in my school? Does social justice education abound in my school? Do all learners have an equitable opportunity for success in my school under my leadership? Are trajectories being altered in my school under my leadership? Are my young men given ample opportunity to transform into the men that they were destined to become? Do my young ladies have ample opportunity to transform into the women that they were born to become? Does cultural responsiveness in terms of relationship between teacher and student abound in my classrooms under my leadership? Does cultural relevance relative to instruction and learning abound in that school under my leadership? And I can go on and on. What I'm asking is my school a better school because I lead it? Are these variables and so much more that I would need more time to express, do they manifest within my school? But here's another big one. Does instructional leadership abound in that school? So as I'm going through this every day, I don't care what the weather is. I don't care if it's snowing. I don't care if it's raining. I don't care if it's below 0 degrees. I'm going through this ritual. And here's why. Because I can't wait. You can't wait for an evaluator of record to inform you of your effectiveness. I don't have that kind of time. I've got to determine my effectiveness, and I've got to do it on a daily basis because my young people are counting on me to be extraordinary at what I do. Your young people are counting on you to be extraordinary at what you do. You can't come into that building as a leader half-stepping. You can't come into that building as a leader being okay, being average, being mediocre. You can't even be good. You got to be phenomenal. So to that regard, I'm saying to you, I got to check me I got to assess me. I've got to evaluate me. I'm saying to you, you've got to assess you. You've got to evaluate you. You've got to make the determination, because you may not have somebody else that can do it for you in real time. And that includes a thought partner. That includes an accountability partner. That person may not be there in real time to inform you of your effectiveness. So I'm going to ask the question. Now here's the thing with the answer. It's 180 days in the school year here in Jersey. Of the 180 days, a lot of those days, my answer was a flat out emphatic, no, the school is not better because I lead it. See, that's me, that's you being honest with ourselves. Because the ego, it's very easy for the ego to say, yes, 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 I'm the greatest, I'm the best, I'm the most likely to take this school to heights previously unimagined. That's easy. Ego will give you that. But when you take ego and lift it up and place it over here, and then you deal with your leadership from that vantage point, right? Is this school a better school because I lead it? Nah, not today. Here's why. Hey, leaders out there watching, but also those of you who are not in administrative leadership capacities, but you are a leader. There's not a person in education that's not a leader. The custodian's a leader. The security officer's a leader. Secretary's a leader. Cafeteria worker's a leader. Everybody's a leader, right? It just depends on leading what, right? In what capacity. So here I'm saying, you know, the work, if I could stretch my arms out, the work goes beyond our fingertips. But I'm not going, quite frankly, I'm not going to get to all the work every day. I may not get to many facets of the work in the course of a year. But for me, as I narrow my hands, I said there were really only two things that mattered to me, that they're non-negotiable, that they must be in place each and every day. Everything else was on the table. This is me personal now. Number one, instructional leadership. Because see, when I talk about, like a few minutes ago, when I spoke on equity, when I spoke on social justice education, when I spoke on cultural responsibility, when I spoke on cultural relevance, right? For example, that's falling under the umbrella of instructional leadership. I may not have a teacher that walks into a building that understands the difference between equity and equality. I may not have a teacher that walks into a building understanding that equity is not solely what you do, but equity is in much larger scope, a reflection of who you are, right? I say that equity is a reflection of the teacher's humanity toward the students that he or she services. Right. So I may not have a teacher that comes in with that mindset, that equity mindset, and may come in with the understanding that there's certain practices that I need to engage in, but may not understand the attitude that I must bring in the classroom. So as instructional leader, I'm going to teach that. I can't change what you feel up here, but I can expose you to it, right? Expose you to what an equity mindset instructor is. And the difference between an equity mindset instructor and an isolation and equity practitioner, right? They're very different, and the results are very different. So for me, within the question, is my school a better school because I lead it? Well, the first non-negotiable for me was, to what extent was I on top of my game as instructional leader? In other words, did a teacher grow today because of my presence in the building? Did a teacher become that much closer to point B from point A because of my leadership? Can a teacher look at me and say that I am growing exponentially because of the collegial relationship that I have with Principal Kafele? Or is a teacher looking at me and saying, I don't even see the man, I don't even know what he does, right? See, I always say, leader, when I walk into your school, not only do I want to see the leader, but more so, I want to be able to see the leadership. In fact, when I walk into the school, I want to be able to see the leadership without having to see the leader. Leader could be home with the flu, but I still see the leadership manifest itself because your thumbprint is literally all over the building. So second non-negotiable, Student engagement. Oh man, I got to communicate with students all day long. You got to communicate with students all day long, not during instruction, but there's a whole lot of time, particularly at the secondary level, where young people are changing classes. Well, I'm gonna be visible out there. I'm gonna be engaging them out there. I'm gonna fire them up out there. We're gonna have conversations out there. If I got 1,000 youngsters in the building, I'm gonna know all 1,000 stories. If I got 2,000 in the building, I'm gonna know all 2,000 stories. I'm gonna know all 2,000 names, whatever it is. I'm going to know you as if you were my biological child. I'm going to know you as if you were my relative. See, that's student engagement. So now, because that's a goal of mine, then I got to engage you. Cafeteria, gymnasium, outside grounds, wherever it is. But again, I'm saying all that to say that I had these two non-negotiables: instructional leadership, student engagement. I'm saying to the folks that are on this call today, I'm saying to the folks that will see this video later on, I'm asking you, what are your non-negotiables? What is that thing that defines your leadership, that defines you as leader? But you know, as the time is winding down, there's a word in here that you gotta consider. And that word is the word why. See, I've been in education since 1988. First year, 5th grade teacher in Brooklyn, New York City, and walked into that school rooted, grounded, planted in my why. When I say my why, I'm saying my purpose, my reason, because. I'm asking you this afternoon, what's your why? What is the reason you do this? What is the motivation? Or are you just in there going through the motions? See, that's how you distinguish the building leader from the building manager, because that leader is rooted in a why. And that why drives that leader. My why was the empowerment of my young men. See, I wanted to make sure that my young men understood what it was to be a man. But my young men, they were Black. They were all Black, 100% of them. So I needed them to understand what it was to be a Black man in America. That was my why. And I needed them to have a firm grounding in history. I needed them to know African-American history, African Caribbean history, African continental history. I needed them to know who they were, who the reflection was in their mirror, because I understood clearly the correlation between them having a sense of who they are historically and culturally and what they can achieve academically and professionally. So when people, when I listen to my bio and people talk about the things that I've accomplished in education, I say, yeah, I did, but it's because I understood the necessary ingredients. And that was all rooted in my why, my reason, my because. So as I'm closing this out, I'm asking you, what's your why? What do you do this work for? What are your objectives as a leader? Where will your students be as a result of you being the leader of that building, the leader of that district, the leader of that division? Where will your teachers be? Where will your overall staff be because you lead? You got to know that before you take the first step. You got to have that vision. You got to have that leadership mission, that leadership purpose, that leadership vision for where your school will be. So there's so much more to say, but I'm gonna be waiting for that phone call so that I can get to your school and talk about it all, your district, all day long. So with that being said, I thank you, and I'm gonna turn it back over to Mark.
Oh, Principal Kafele, that was fantastic. A lot of stuff to think about. Really.
Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Our final Avenger is a best-selling author and professor at UCLA, who Education Week called one of the 50 most influential scholars in the nation. He will discuss racial equality in schools. Tyrone Howard.
Thank you, Mark. It's always an honor, a privilege, and it's quite humbling whenever I have the opportunity to talk to educators, because in many ways, I think about the fact that my story is a story that should not have ever resulted in me having the opportunity to engage principals, leaders, teachers, Because my story is one that was rooted in a lot of challenges and obstacles, like many of you can probably attest to. Being born in an inner city neighborhood, poverty, being a young Black boy, I didn't see many people who looked like me who graduated from high school, let alone went on to college. Those were not realities in the neighborhood that I grew up in. The fact that I'm able to teach at a college now is still, in many ways, a dream come true. And that only happened not because of something phenomenal that I did. Believe you me, that's far from the reality. I made too many mistakes along my journey. It happened because I had the good fortune of having adults, educators who saw something in me that at times I did not see in myself. I had educators who had the courage and the conviction to say, these are your circumstances, but you don't have to be defined by your circumstances. I had the good fortune to have educators who were willing to push and challenge and help me to recognize that something bigger and better could await me if I was willing to recognize my full potential. I had the good fortune of having educators who were willing to help me to understand that I did not have to become another statistic. They talked about college, they talked about career, they talked about life. They had the courage and the conviction to not lower their expectations about me because of my skin color or because of my socioeconomic status. I had the good fortune of having educators who had the courage and the conviction who said that you will not be defined by your zip code. I had the good fortune to have educators who are willing to be able to be honest, straightforward, to tell me the truth, but to also hold themselves accountable. I share all those things about what made a difference in my life because educators make differences every single day. I am a living testimony of that. And when educators make a difference, it has a multiple effect across generations. My 4 kids today have a much better life because of the educators that I have long before they were even thought of. So whenever I have the opportunity to engage with educators, part of what I oftentimes stress is that you make a huge difference in this work. But I think in this moment, we have to ask ourselves, do we have enough courageous educators out there to do what is needed in today's moment? I raise that because we have a number of challenges facing us in this current moment. And we need courageous leaders. We need courageous educators to be willing to step up, speak out, speak loudly on behalf of all students, but in particular, those who, like me, were among the most vulnerable. I say that because when we think about this current moment of where we are, I need educators to understand that your jobs are incredibly difficult in typical times. And for that, you are to be commended for your commitment to this work. I'm a former 5th grade teacher, 3rd grade teacher, 1st grade teacher. I know the challenges that come with being in the classroom, helping to develop and shape young minds. But as we find ourselves in the midst of and in the aftermath, hopefully, of a pandemic, I would say that your jobs are going to become even more challenging because I think we're dealing with what I refer to as the Twin Endemic, the Twin Endemic. And I want to spend a few moments talking about what that Twin Endemic is and why we have to react and respond in a different way. The Twin Endemic is really sort of the convergence of 2 major events that have happened to this country that we have to come to grips with. The first pandemic has been that which is COVID-19. I don't need to say much about that. You all know that. You know how it has led to significant learning loss for all students, but at the same time, let us be clear, the learning loss has not affected all students in the same way. We know that learning loss has been deeper and more severe and more persistent for Black, brown, and poor children than it has been for others. We also must be prepared to talk about the fallout of the socio-emotional challenges that many young people are facing in this moment. Because even as we go back to schools, whether that be in the hybrid model, remote, or even full back on in-person schools, we must stand back and have courageous educators who are willing to say, stop, let's understand that for many of our young people, they have faced high levels of anxiety, high levels of stress, social isolation. Many have lost loved ones. Many have also suffered significant loss because their parents and caregivers have been essential workers. So we need to understand what the significance of this moment has been in terms of the social, emotional health and well-being of our students. So one of the first things we need courageous educators to do, courageous leaders to do, is to recognize the importance of mental health in this moment. We have seen significant upticks in the number of young people who have had suicidal ideation during the last 9 months. We have to have a hard conversation about mental health. We have to have a hard conversation about social, emotional well-being, because all too often, what we know is that while we don't want to talk about mental health, our students need us to respond in this moment. The unfortunate reality is far too many schools don't have the adequate supports in schools to put social workers, therapists, counselors in schools. So now today's educators have to play that role in addition to all the other roles and responsibilities that they have. We must give teachers the resources, the skills, the strategies to be able to respond in real time to the social emotional needs and actual mental health needs that far too many students are going to need. Millions of students are going to need our support. I believe as we do this work, we must always remember to put Maslow before we put Bloom. We cannot get our students to reach their full academic potential if they are worried about having their most basic needs met, which this pandemic has led to. An increase in the number of students who are experiencing homelessness, an increase in the number of students who are experiencing food insecurities, an increase in the number of students who are subjected to abuse and neglect. We have to recognize that students can focus on memory, analyzing, synthesizing content when I don't know where I'm going to sleep at night. So there's a courageous conversation we must have in this moment about the ways in which we provide all educators with the skills, the resources, and the knowledge to understand when young people have been situated in traumatic situations with this, which this is one of those traumatic situations, we can't go back to business as usual. And when we know young people are dealing with traumatic situations, behavior falls into the fight, flight, or freeze mode. So we need to talk in more detail about those 3 Fs. So when we see students fighting, fleeing, and freeing, we're not going to punish students who are oftentimes hurting. Oftentimes, what we call quote unquote bad behavior from students is the language that students are using to say, I need help, support me, listen to me. I'm really struggling right now. I'm hurting right now. I need someone to be empathetic with me right now. So we need courageous educators to be willing to step up and say, we know that mental health matters. We're going to prioritize mental health. When we see students behave in certain ways, we're not going to pathologize those students, but we're going to bring those students in and give them the love and the support and the attention and the care and the resources that they so desperately deserve and need. So that's why this first pandemic we have to tackle is all the aftermath of COVID-19, not just the learning loss, but also the social, emotional health and well-being, because we know that in this country, mental health has always been a taboo topic. We have to destigmatize mental health and tell our young people that it's not a sign of weakness to say that you need help and support. It's a sign of strength to say that I need help and support. We have to model it ourselves as educators to tell young people that we have our own moments where we feel depressed, where we suffer from anxiety. This is the conversation we have to be courageous enough to have, is that in this moment, our students need something different. We cannot go back to business as usual because we have not been through business as usual. We have to establish a new norm. We have to establish a new way of thinking and doing this work as it pertains to the real needs that our students are going to have socially, emotionally, and mentally if we're going to help them reach their full potential. So that's the first of our twin endemic, is tackling the aftermath of COVID-19. The second part of this pandemic, of the twin endemic, is how we come to grips with the new reality that is called racial demographics. I want to bring to your attention that what we saw in 2015 was something that this country had never, ever witnessed. In 2015, this country enrolled more non-white students in kindergarten than it did white students. Let me say this one more time. 2015, according to the US Department of Education, we enrolled more non-white students in kindergarten than white students. That was a significant shift. First time it had happened. Demographers had expected that to happen around 2020. We reached that milestone 5 years earlier. So what does that tell us? We also have to have a courageous conversation about the racial realities in our classrooms. We cannot avoid it. We can't look past it. We can't sweep it under the rug. We are a changing nation. Bottom line, we are seeing more African American, more Asian American, Asian Pacific Islander, more Latino students, more indigenous students coming to our classrooms. This is not just something that's for the coast, the East Coast and the West Coast. We are seeing amazing diversity all across this country, in Middle America, in the southern parts of America. Diversity is our strength. Diversity is something we should be proud of. Diversity is something we should embrace because that says who we are as a nation. But let us be clear. Why we need to be courageous about this is because while we should be embracing this racial and ethnic diversity in our schools, not all teachers are equipped to deal with the racial realities that we're seeing in schools. How do I know? Because as we see our student population becoming more racially and ethnically diverse, our teaching population is doing just the opposite. It's becoming more racially homogenous. Again, according to the US Department of Education, about 85% of all classroom teachers are white, and about half of those teachers have had minimal experience working with students of color. So we have a racial divide we've got to address. We must help all teachers, but in particular, since 85% of our classroom teachers are white, to acquire the knowledge, skills, and strategies to work with diverse learners, to work with students who come from different racial and ethnic backgrounds, to work with students who come from different cultural and language backgrounds. We cannot act as if this is not a reality. Far too many states in this country, Middle America, Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, Kentucky, states that did not have to think about racial and ethnic diversity for years are now having to come to grips with a new reality. I need you to also understand this: in 2032, that's merely 12 years from now, students who are starting school this year, by the time they finish high school, this nation will see the majority of its students, I want you to be clear about this, the majority of its students will be non-white. This is a change that is not going to undo itself. We must develop a racial awareness, cultural competence around the very students that we are serving today. What we can no longer do, educators, and this oftentimes is what makes lots of people very uncomfortable, we can no longer say, well, I'm going to take a colorblind approach and say, I don't see color, I see only children. That is part and parcel of the problem. We can no longer do that. We can no longer act as if people's racial identities don't matter, because they do. And to tell students that their racial identity does not matter says basically you don't matter. A core part of who you are, I'm going to try to render invisible. That's not going to get it. We have to be bold enough, courageous enough to begin to ask ourselves some hard questions, to talk about how we can reflect on our own racial attitudes, our own racial biases, which we all have. Because if we don't check them, they will inform the way we engage with our students. We must come to grips with the fact that we have a racial divide, but I want to be clear. I don't believe that you have to be of the same racial ethnic background as your students to teach them, because I'm a product of having white teachers who did phenomenal jobs with me. There are white teachers who do phenomenal work with teachers every day in this country, and they do it because they take time out to listen and learn from students. They check their own racial beliefs and attitudes. They reflect on their behaviors, and they make sure they hold those students to the heights of expectations, regardless of their racial background. That's what we need to do. If this is going to happen, we start having courageous conversations about race. We have to. We can't run from it. We are one of the most racially diverse countries on the entire planet, yet we don't want to have conversations about race. If we don't want to have these conversations, shame on us. So it's going to require leaders to start these conversations, leaders to sustain these conversations. And this is not about blaming folks or pointing fingers. This is about bringing folks in to help them to understand this is a conversation we have to have. So if we're going to do this work the right way moving forward, we must come to grips with our new reality, which is our racial diversity, our strength. We must talk about the 3 R's, not reading, writing, and arithmetic, but 3 different R's: racism, relationships, and rigor. Because let's be clear, racism exists in our society. What we saw over the summer and spring was a massive uprising of people saying that, you know what, we must fight to end systemic racism. We must talk about racism in schools because it happens. We must talk about racism in classrooms because it happens. Let's not act as if issues around racism don't happen, because they do. We see examples of it every single day with regard to school punishment, school discipline, suspensions, expulsions that have a disproportionate impact on students of color. These are conversations we must have, and they can't just be one-offs. They must be ongoing, sustained conversations. So we must talk about racism. That second R we must talk about is we must talk about relationships, because they matter. One of the ways to bridge the gap across racial divide is to begin to know who students are, to listen to students, to learn from students, to share of ourselves so that students begin to see who we are and we humanize ourselves. Relationships are a key part to how we begin to make sure that we connect with students regardless of their racial ethnic backgrounds. We have an increase in students who are going to speak languages other than English. We have an increase of students who will be either immigrants themselves or the children of immigrants. That means we have to learn. That means we have to grow. That means we have to take the time out to learn who our students are and not assume that their experiences are the same as ours and vice versa. And then that third R we must be prepared to engage in is rigor, because one of the ways I think that 21st century forms of racism manifest themselves in school is with low expectations and with poor instructional quality. And there are children of color who are more likely to receive that poor instructional quality beyond anyone else. So how do we make sure that all students, but in particular those students who are poor and students of color, have access to rigorous, complex, thought-provoking types of curriculum in every situation that they're in? So this is where we have to have the courageous conversation to make sure that this work is about recognizing race, celebrating our racial differences, embracing the racial realities that our students bring to the classroom, teachers being better, all teachers, not just white teachers. Teachers of color also have to do this work, but also how do we engage parents and caregivers in this work so that they don't feel like they're on the outside looking in. We have to address the cultural disconnects that occur in many of our classrooms, because I think we have well-intentioned teachers, well-intentioned leaders who just culturally don't know how to connect with the students and the families that they are serving. So this is a hard and a heavy lift, but it's a lift that we have to do. It's a hard and heavy lift because our students need it in this moment. It's a hard and heavy lift because it requires people who are willing to be courageous, people who are willing to be honest, straightforward, and to recognize that we all mess up in this work. But the bottom line is not to just wallow about our mistakes. It's about getting up and coming back again to show up for our students. I take this work personal because it was me. My life is fundamentally different because those teachers were not afraid to be courageous. They were not afraid to be bold. They were not afraid to push me and others who look like me to say, you can be whatever you put your mind to. So I maintain in this moment, we have an opportunity for a reset to reimagine the way that schools look, the way that schools feel, the way that young people engage in schools. So I ask you to do these last three things: to know that we can be better, to care enough for every child because those children need our love and attention more than ever before, and to act boldly, to act courageously, and to act with conviction in everything that we do every single day. Our students deserve nothing short of our 110% effort every single day. So I thank you for listening. I thank you for teaching. I thank you for leading. I thank you for loving the very young people who we say are our most cherished possession. We have got to roll our sleeves up, do this work well. We will be more than satisfied with the fruits of our labor if we do this the right way. Thank you so much. I'll turn it back over to Mark.
Thanks, Dr. Howard. A lot of good stuff for people to think about. And I do appreciate all of our panelists who are here today. I want to thank them for taking time out of their busy days to join us for Chapter 5 of the Avengers, Education Avengers. Also, I want to thank you for all joining us today for this program. We will have a copy of this video posted on our website shortly if you want to review it or have a friend review it. The other thing is, please watch for a special Education Avengers website announcement that will be showing up in your email. So again, thanks for joining us today on this Thursday afternoon. We appreciate seeing you.